And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Workplace Wanderer. I'm Blake Cohen.
Hi, Kara Kirby.
Hi, Kara.
Hi, Blake.
How's it going?
It's going good. I just got back from a kids' field trip, so I'm shifting out of mom mode into work mode right now. Is it working?
No, you
All
feel
right.
very motherly right now.
Oh, dang. I just gave a big speech of like, do not come up here and ask me for snacks. Can you do it? You have 1 hour.
Oh, kids love big speeches. They always listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
They're going to definitely pay attention.
Well, my first child actually does. He's like, I will not disturb you, mommy. My second child would burn the house down by now.
Okay. I think I relate more to the first child. I was very good, at least in front of my parents, I was very good. And then as soon as they were gone, I was a terror. Anyway, Kara, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite TikTok friends. Chris, I bet you didn't even know that. But Chris and we became TikTok friends in the golden age of TikTok when it was super fun. And I started following him. And I will say that you probably don't even know this, but I always harp on performance reviews and stacked ranking and a bunch of stuff that came out from the GE Welch era. And Chris would always comment on my videos and be like, hey, Kara, if you ever want to know about what was really happening, I lived through it. And so I've always, since you were making those comments, wanted to have you on a podcast and be like, all right, tell me all the deets. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have so much fun. And will you please introduce yourself to everyone? Because I don't think I could probably even do it justice, all the amazing things you've done in the past 40 years. No pressure.
Thanks. Well, it's good to be here with both of you. I'm Chris Williams. I have been in and around the corporate world for, I think I looked the other day, it's working on 50 years now.
Oh,
I can't believe it.
50.
Yeah,
Wow.
I tell a story on my podcast about my first job, and I went back and realized that that first job was 50 years ago. So,
Wow.
anyway, I've worked in a variety of jobs, mostly in the technical industry. Wrote a lot of code. I've written code that you've run. And I ended up at Microsoft through an acquisition. Had a wonderful experience at Microsoft in the 90s. And ended up one day deciding that it would be kind of fascinating and interesting to move into HR, which most of my friends thought I was out of my mind. But I moved into HR and ended up being the VP of HR for all of Microsoft when Steve Ballmer took over as CEO in the late 90s. I did that job for a few years. Eventually moved on. And since that time, I've been consulting. And as I said, I did my own podcast for a while. I've done a bunch of things. Recently, I'm really focused on working with the group in corporate that I think has the hardest job in the world, which is managers of managers, those directors and VPs and general managers who are responsible for the meat and the middle of most corporations. The people at the top, the CEOs, get a lot of attention. The people at the bottom get a lot of training and support and how to be a manager 101 is everywhere. That's all. But the people in the middle have really, really tough jobs and they get no attention. So I'm focused on doing a lot of work with those people these days. And that's what the focus of my consulting work is these days. And the focus of the social media that I do lately has been focused on that. So that's who I am. That's what I've been doing. And I'd love to tell you the GE story at some point.
Oh, we'll get to it. We'll make sure that we get to that. Sounds interesting. I love this topic, and I think that it's a very important one to discuss because you're right. It's often overlooked. What does it mean to manage a manager, and how do we do that effectively? However, before we jump into that, I was looking through your email about topics that we can discuss today. And one of the topics, real quick, that I just want to touch on and not focus too much is the rise of the discussions about toxic management. And it's funny because yesterday I was on one of the socials and noticed as your algorithm starts to show you more of this like corporate culture, HR world, everybody in their mother is talking about my toxic leader, my toxic boss,
Hmm.
my toxic work culture. Why do you think that is?
I think the thing that has is been difficult for nearly everyone in in the corporate workspace is to understand things from the other side of the table. Some people call it empathy, some people call it a wide variety of things. But I think there's a significant lack of ability of people to understand outside their own box and understand the box on the other side of the table. And from a manager's perspective, that looks like managers who pay no attention to the differences between individual employees.
Hmm.
So one of the things I like to talk to people about is, diversity. I'm a huge fan of diversity and equity and inclusion, and I don't care if that really gets people upset. The reason why it matters, however, is because each person in your organization is a separate and individual human being. Some people like direct feedback. Some people get hurt when you give them direct feedback. Some people read emails. Some people prefer text messages. Some people want an in-person conversation. Some people are really good at learning new things. Other people, it takes them 6 or 7 times to figure it out. Some people came from a background that includes a lot of college education, and some people did not. And every single person in your organization is a unique and separate human being. And so, from a manager's perspective, you have to recognize that and talk to people how they need to be talked to and work with people in ways that they need help and work on each individual person as a separate person. And that requires you to get out of your own body and get into somebody else's mind
Hmm.
for at least a few minutes. On the other hand, the same thing happens on the other side of the coin. Employees look up at their manager, they see them saying something that they don't understand or is that is confusing or even bad or terrible or whatever, and they never spend 2 seconds to figure out why is he asking me to do that silly thing, or why would he even ask me to do something that's so offensive, when if in fact if you thought about it for 2 seconds and thought about it from their perspective, you would realize they didn't mean what you thought they meant. They meant something, right?
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot of misunderstanding going on, assumptions about what's happening on the other side of the table. And so I think there's just a ton of that. And I, further, though, is the environment that has grown up in the last, I would say, few years, which is a much more we, them, us against them tension in all areas of our life. It happens in the political arena where the people on the other side of the fence are the devil or whatever, need to be tossed out of the country or thrown in jail or whatever. But it happens in the workplace too. And so there's accusations that happen that are just, it's all polarized and we're separating apart. And here again, I think this spending 2 minutes and trying to understand who's that person on the
Yep.
other side of the table would change everything. And I think that's a core to almost all of it.
Hmm. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I'm watching it yesterday and decided to make a video of myself, and I haven't posted it yet, only because I am anticipating blowback. Because essentially, when I talk about, there's a lot of people that I keep seeing who they somehow magically keep landing 3, 4, 5 jobs in a row. Their culture is toxic, their boss was toxic, and they're constantly telling these stories. And when in reality, I know that so much of the work that we do, especially as we progress in our career, relies on us doing our own work and taking a good hard
Mm.
look at ourselves. And there is a very low likelihood that you somehow managed to land at 3, 4, 5 toxic companies in a row. It just doesn't make sense. That's very hard to do. Oftentimes, what that means is that you might be the problem.
Yeah, it's not them, it's you.
Yeah, which is okay. And that was the point I'm trying to make in the video. Hey, I'm not trying to gaslight you here or victim shame. What I'm saying is that there might be something that your environment is telling you. And it doesn't have to be this us versus them mentality, as you said. There could be some work that you're doing, you can do on yourself, or there could be something that you're projecting that's keeping people at arm's length.
Or
Um,
or it's in some ways like like the recent rise, for example, in the number of cases of autism. And a lot of what that is coming from is the diagnostic tools have gotten better. Well, it could well be that when you walk into a workplace, you're looking for those pieces that are
Mhm.
that are opposite or that are toxic, right? You're going and finding them and making the place more toxic than it might otherwise be because you're looking for those things.
Well,
Okay, let me add something in this
okay.
conversation. Just to give a
Please,
voice to
please,
the
please,
people.
please.
I tell this story a lot, but one time I was on a stage and there was probably like 1,000 people in the audience, and I asked everyone to raise their hand. It was like an on-the-spot experiment. I probably shouldn't have done this because it was not well thought out. But I asked people who had an example growing up where their parents settled conflicts and they did it like adults, right? Like they knew how to have conflict conversations and they did it in a skillful way.
Hmm.
And I really thought the debrief of that experiment was going to be like, look, 50% of you in this room had really bad examples growing up, right? But it was 0 people. No one raised their hand. And I keep
Wow.
doing that experiment, right? With when I'm in classes, and I do it in a very safe place, but I'm like, raise your hand if you saw it modeled, and no one ever puts their hand up. So I like to offer that perspective because, like, it's like, yes, people might be looking for the bad stuff, but also it's really hard to be a good manager. It's hard to be a good parent. It's
Yeah.
hard to, like, when your spouse is pissing you off, to be like, I'm dysregulated right now. I'm going to calm down and handle this in a nice way and not use any triggering words, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's just, I think it's just hard being human also.
Well, and I 1,000% agree. And I think that's the self-work that I'm referring to is that we often carry our past relationships or our past
Mm-hmm.
examples or our past jobs into our present, and then we look for things that confirm our beliefs that are being
Totally.
carried in. So we see the behavior happen once and it's an auto label. And Chris, what I'm happy that about what you said, and the reason why I was bringing up all of this actually was that my gripe with this movement on social media talking about toxic culture so much is that it's giving people this confirmation bias where they're walking into they hear something on a TikTok for 1 minute or 2 minutes, they go into their workplace and they see one person do that, and all of a sudden they're labeling their workplace culture as toxic. And I think it's people tend to have an all or nothing mentality these days. And that's where this type of conversation is um, could be damaging or destructive in some sense. If we're constantly talking about what makes a toxic leader, then we're looking for one sign and we're looking to label people pretty quickly
Yeah.
without considering the nuance or maybe the moment or the situation of how it influenced. Maybe your manager had a bad day and it's not doesn't mean they're a toxic manager. Does that make sense?
I also think a ton of it goes back to and Kara, this is exactly the same sort of thing. A ton of it goes back to if you could just spend 2 seconds and think about why did that person say that? What was that thing about? What the most underrated skill in management is listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that most managers don't do very well, and it's one of the things I pointed it out in a video I did a while ago that one of the most important things I think a leader can do is to just slow things down. One of the things that happens in a workplace is things get all quick and fast and out of control, and you're doing and if a conversation, you know a conversation is a difficult conversation when it's fast. When it's happening, bang, 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 because nobody's thinking about what's been said. They're not
Mm-hmm.
listening to the person on the other side. So one of the things that I've noticed, and when I'm in a room with somebody who I consider to be an outstanding leader, almost every time it's someone who slows things down.
Mm.
It's someone, excuse me, someone who will take a conversation and just count to 2 before they respond, who will also make sure that everybody in the room is listening, is, hearing and getting input into the conversation, is just trying to figure out a way to lower the temperature in the room and just make sure that people are listening to people on the other side of the table. And one of the things that has been fascinating in my experience is when I go back through my life and think about all the people who I think of who have been outstanding leaders, to a person, they're the kinds of people who tend to respond to really difficult situations, not by getting wild and hyped up and panicked and figuring it out, but who go, huh? And who slow down a little and who think about that and who say, what did you say again? And help me understand what you mean by that. And I'm not sure I get this. And frequently are the kind of people who you almost think like, are they there? Are they watching this? What's the matter with you? Why are you not paying? And the answer is they're thinking about it. They're listening to what's going on. And what that also means is that when it finally becomes their turn to talk about something, everybody's listening to them
Yeah.
because they've thought about a smart thing to say or a smart way to resolve this problem, or maybe we should take a step back and think about what the real meaning behind this issue is. And so to me, this ability to listen and absorb and take in things from the other side of the table is just incredibly valuable, and it's way underplayed. The people who are talking all the time are not listening, right? It's one of the things you see in these social media. I love to watch the social media debates that they have. And you'll have the people who are talking the fastest and are putting out the things, and then you know what you want to do with you. Those are not smart people. They are trying to, gish gallop through the whole. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase, but they're doing the gish gallop, which is just pumping you with so much stuff. They're pushing it so quickly that they're drowning the person on the other side. Those aren't the smart people in the room. Those aren't the people who are making a difference. The people who are making a difference are the ones who are going, uh-huh, and what about, and bring up a single salient point or a single important thing. As I said, I think listening is just, and by the way, this comes from a guy who talks too much. So it's,
I feel that
self-awareness is not necessarily my strongest suit.
Those who cannot do teach, okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, Chris. So I want to take us back a little bit because I think it's so interesting that even in 2025, we have to keep convincing people and convincing business owners that leadership and taking a pause and thinking about people matters, right? Like I feel like in our businesses, we're always making a case for it. So it's still hard to this day. Fair?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like 30 years ago?
Well, one of the things when I came to Microsoft, it was a really fascinating time to be there because at that point, it's difficult for people to remember, but Microsoft was this gleaming city on a hill, the technical epitome of place you want to be. And they were therefore hiring the smartest people literally on the planet. There, I was in meetings with people who I would be sitting at a table, and that person's a Rhodes Scholar, and this person graduated summa cum laude from Carnegie Mellon at age 19, and this person, it was the world's smartest people in the room.
Intimidating.
It was unbelievable. At the time, I used to say it was like playing tennis against Andre Agassi. The ball would come so fast. It was hard to react to it. But part of what happened in that culture is that you had such incredibly electrifyingly smart people that you would get into these incredibly bitter feuds in these meetings where I was, not in the room, but at the company at the time when Bill Gates famously threw a chair at somebody, right? I mean, it was famously what they used to refer to as sharp elbows, right? So but it was always dismissed because these were electrifyingly smart people. And so there were a bunch of parts of it that were really, really good. Like you never went into a meeting and had it begin with one of those people who puts up slides that say, in the very beginning of Earth and mankind, and goes through, goes through 3 hours of
Webster Dictionary says that.
Yeah, exactly. The definition of the word meeting is, and then they go, and you go, oh my God. You would come into a meeting and sit down, and there was the topic at hand, and you were talking about the topic, and,
dreamy.
and argument, discussion, arguing. And so it was very, very high bandwidth. I hate to use that phrase, but lots of really good, but it was incredibly toxic. I had managers. One of the problems we had was it was almost unbelievably young white men. I mean, it was
with egos, I imagine.
Oh, they had all
the biggest.
Yes, because they had all gone early to Harvard and then graduated with an MBA in 2 years, and then had whatever. So but it was you'd look around the room, and there's a 30-year-old kid from Connecticut, there's a 33-year-old guy from the Valley, it was a homogenous culture that treated women with absolutely terrible effect. I mean, when I took over HR, one of the biggest problems we had was the toxic treatment of women in the organization. But also, there were like 3 African Americans in the building, practically. I mean, it was just there. Wow. There began to be a bunch of South Asians, Indians, and those sorts, because Indian IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology, was bringing in people all the time. But there was oh God, being gay was really out there. It was so. It
was like a frat house of egotistical.
And that led to this sharp elbows culture. But it was I can't tell you how it upped your game to be knowing you're about to walk into a room with some of the smartest people on the planet.
Well,
so you would never go in unprepared.
I was going to ask you, because obviously that's also the time of Microsoft, right? That's where they had their greatest successes.
Yep.
So while I disagree with almost everything that they were doing based on what you're telling us, there's also, what was the secret sauce, or was it the arguing? Was it the competitiveness that helped push them over that edge? And what does that do for somebody who's working there? And how does that help you grow? Obviously, it informed some of your beliefs and showed you also what not to do. But what were some of the little tidbits of working there that you felt like helped you as well, or helped the company?
Well, there were a bunch of really interesting things going on. First of all, there was an incredible passion for incredibly high quality work. So you would be sort of culturally shamed if the quality of your work wasn't. I mean, so that raised the bar quite a bit. But the management did some things that were really kind of insane. So, for example, there were 2 groups creating Windows at the same time, right? There was a group creating Windows 95 and those sorts of things. There was a separate group creating Windows NT. So, and these 2 groups were at each other's throats. It was internecine warfare of the worst possible
Interesting. Kind. And it was manufactured to be like that?
Yep. Steve Ballmer very clearly said that, see, there is no competition outside, so we have to create it inside. And it ended up with some of the most just terrible fights and jealousies, and oh God, it was terrible. But some of that was manufactured. So the other part of the problem was that winning was endemic. So the stock price doubled like every year for like 8-9 years in a row. And so that made people multimillionaire. I mean, we had secretaries who were multimillionaires because they'd gotten grants early on, and but these people had never lost, right? And had never had, and so failure was looked down upon again, the quality of your work matters. So failure was just a red badge of failure all over you. And there were a number of things about that that were not good and were not healthy. It created a bunch of people who thought they could do no wrong. And they
You
went
know,
on to other places and did wrong.
You know
Yeah.
what's so interesting is that I mean you read this in all the business books now about how like the culture transformation at Microsoft,
Yeah.
there's such a focus on like getting people to like lead into a growth mindset. And I wonder if it's because there's those pieces of that toxic culture of people being so scared of failure that's still alive and well in the veins of that organization.
Well, here's what the perhaps Bill was at the time I went into HR. Bill was tired and you know, he had grown the company from zero to, you know, hero in fairly short order, in 15 or 20 years or whatever. And it was, you know, one of the most valuable companies on the planet, et cetera, et cetera. And so he was thinking of moving on. But at the same time, Bill had also grown a ton. When I first met Bill, Bill was, you know, his favorite thing was, "That's the stupidest effing thing I've ever heard," right? He would say to someone in a meeting, "That's the stupidest," and I promise you he didn't say effing, "thing I've ever heard," right to somebody's face. And then he would say, "Your mother must have been stupid," or "What kind of school did you
Wow.
go to?" Or when I first got there. But he mellowed and realized, and some of it had to do with getting older, some of it had to do with having children, some of it had to do with um, 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 Melinda's good influences and whatnot, and he had mellowed quite a bit and was a much more thoughtful leader and much. And I, as I was very fortunate as VP of HR. I had frequent one-on-one meetings with him about various leaders and a number of things. And he'd gotten to be really thoughtful and introspective and
Hmm.
ask questions about that. But then he turned the company over to Steve Ballmer, who was cut from that original cloth of internecine warfare, and you know, you fail, you're a loser, and whatnot.
What were his influences? Just like that's the way he grew up in corporate America.
And he was in the sales side of the business and
Ah,
pushed and pushed and pushed. And he got continuously rewarded for that kind of,
there you
I'll
go.
never
Yeah.
forget him saying, a win-win means something was left on the table, right? I mean, that's one of
Hmm.
his famous lines. So he was a very, that original culture, hardcore, you know, take no prisoners kind of leader. And so what was a company that was coming sort of out of its adolescence, sort of dove directly back into that sort of dark adolescence for the whatever it was, 15 or 20 years that Ballmer was in charge of the company. The fascinating thing is that the board was smart enough to pick Satya, who is exactly the kind of leader I was talking about before.
Mm.
He's
Yeah.
one of those people who will sit at the end of the
He's
table.
like real, like all
Yep.
those stories about
Well,
him are real. That's so
yes.
nice to hear.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking that
and
too.
and he has a special needs child, so he's very attuned to all kinds of influences like that. I tell a famous a story that was just absolutely amazing to me. I had left the company. I had known Satya when we were both sort of young executives in the company early on, and I had left the company and had gone to on to do other things. Had not been back on the Microsoft campus for at least 5 years. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, come to the campus. We'll go have lunch and whatnot." And I got there, and he said, "Oh, come on up." And so I went up to his office, and I happened to walk past Satya's office, and he was not CEO at this point. He was a VP of something or other. And again, I had left several years earlier, and I walked by his office, and his door was open, and he goes, "Hey, Chris," and called me. I had not seen the man in at least six
Wow.
years. And he goes, "Hey,
Wow.
Chris." And I stopped and said, "Hey, how are you?" And we stopped and had a chat. And he asked me how I was doing and where I was from. You know, he knew when I had left, and we did a little. This is a guy I hadn't. So that just told me volumes about the kind of person he was. And yes, he is very committed and knows exactly what he wants to have happen, but he knows in a meeting how to make that happen. And he will be one of those people who's sort of quiet and serene at the end of the table and listening to it all happen. And then he speaks, right? And everybody goes, yep, that seems to be the right answer. Let's go that way. So he has managed to change a bunch of it. But the problem is, it's a company of whatever it is, 130,000 employees. I don't know what it is. It's some huge number, right? And so that culture does start at the top, but it just takes a long time to work its way down through the organization. And Kara, let me give you one specific example that is absolutely my favorite one, which was when I was put into to HR, there were 83 vice presidents in the company, 14 of whom were women. And when I left as VP of HR, having worked as VP of HR for Steve Ballmer, when I left, my job of VP of HR was taken over by the one remaining female vice president.
Wow.
So they felt so isolated by Ballmer's behavior and his leadership style that they all started leaving.
The day I decided, this is a story I don't tell very often, the day I decided to leave, I was in my office, and one of the smartest women I had ever met in my life, who was a VP, had come into my office and was crying in my office about how she can't take it anymore. And I shared a wall with Steve Ballmer. So one of my walls was Steve's office, and she was in there and crying. And by the way, I had men and women crying in my office not infrequently. That's sort of part of the job of being a head of HR at a large company. Anyway, she was in my office and crying and telling me how she can't take it anymore. And why do I need to do this? And one of the problems we had at the time was that all these people were independently wealthy, so they didn't need to be there, right? They just, and my door comes flinging open, and it's Ballmer, and he goes, "I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay, see, I'll be right there. Can I 5 minutes?" Kind of, "No, I need to talk to you right now." So I turned to her and I said, "I'll be right back. Please just hang on." And I go trouncing into Steve's office, and he asked me about something particularly stupid. I don't remember what it was, but yeah, okay, fine, I'll take care of it. Fine, fine. I go back to my office, and her badge was on my desk.
Oh.
Do you think he did that intentionally because he could hear through the wall?
No.
Doesn't sound like a guy that thought about anything else going on around him.
And that was the day in which I said, I'm not sure this is going to work out. Anyway, I have other Ballmer stories and other stories like that that aren't fun. But anyway, I do believe the tide. I have my son and daughter-in-law are at Microsoft now, and they are killing it. And they tell me that a bunch of things are different. Although my daughter-in-law went through 4 different managers when she first started, because she ended up getting, people who had been there since the early Mesozoic era and were horrible managers. And she finally got to an organization now where she's the star in the group. And so it's a place where people can excel. It's just, they haven't managed to completely shake the origin culture.
How long has it been since Ballmer left?
Satya's been it's 9 or 10 years, I think, something like that.
It was 2014, maybe? I don't know. All those years blur together for me.
That's kind of, that's one of the things. But it just, large scale culture change takes for frickin' ever, right?
That's what I was thinking too, is that it's just, I can only imagine how long it's taking for the old culture to flush out. And even what I would have loved and killed to be a part of is being there, just a fly on the wall when Satya took over and they start making these changes. And all of these people who maybe actually enjoyed the highly competitive environment and enjoyed that type of behavior now have to make adjustments. I would have just loved to have been a part of that or seen that happen in action.
It's one of the things, and I know Kara and I think you and I talked about this the last time we talked, which albeit a year or so ago was, but it's one of the things that is problematic in these kinds of cultures is that many times those people who are not necessarily good for the culture are incredibly high performant. And it's incredibly hard for an organization to shoot somebody who is really bringing in the gold, but is also a horrible human being, right? And you find yourself saying, "Ooh, if I got rid of this person," and I find myself challenging leaders at various times to say, are they the reason why it's going so well? Or are there other factors that are why their group is performing so well that if
Mm-hmm.
you took them out would actually flourish in the absence of that toxicity?
Is
And
that sales guy killing all of his numbers because he's such an amazing salesperson, or is he just in the right territory with a low quota? You
yeah,
know,
does he have 6 or 8 absolute, blossoms waiting underneath him that as
exactly.
soon as he's gone would just go nuts
Right.
without that? So
I,
It's
I
been
just
story, I tell a
it
story of long, long ago. I was on the board of a small company that was doing let's just say manual labor. There was a group of people in the shop doing manual labor, and there was one absolute superstar in the group who managed to do twice as well as nearly everybody else and kept making demands on people and was a jerk. And one day he came into the CEO's office, and I was there, and he demanded a huge increase in pay. And the guy left, and the CEO said, "I got to give it to him." And I said, "No, you got to fire him." And "What are you talking?" So eventually, I talked him into firing this guy. And the day we fired him, I said, "I'll be there with you. I'll help you fire him." We fired him. The guy, as he was packing up his gear to leave, the rest of the shop applauded.
no way.
wow.
What
Yes.
a moment.
And he left, and the place exploded.
Oh, love to hear it.
Everybody else upped their game because this toxic clown was gone, right? I'll
Oh,
never forget. It began as one of those slow claps as he was leaving, and the whole place
Wow.
applauded as he left. Anyway,
I was just thinking about this last night because I know we touched on this already. I'm trying to promote something, so I'm trying to do more videos on social media, which so I'm constantly trying to write down ideas. So one of the ideas is asking ChatGPT for leadership advice and then reviewing it and going, let's see what it says and let's see what I think about it, or maybe you can add to it. And one of them was about this topic. And the piece that I was thinking about last night, okay, what am I going to say based off its advice, which was pretty good, by the way. It just left out the nuance of the fact that most managers have to answer to people above them. So it's not that easy to just get rid of somebody. It can be really challenging and timely process that you have to be very careful with. But the piece is, what's the business case to get rid of that person? Or to at least maybe not get rid of or address or intervene with that person's behavior in whatever way you can. And the reality, what I was thinking about was, okay, so let's say that person is performing at an 80 to 90% performance rating, but the rest of your team is performing at 50% because of them or lower. If we can address it, yeah, sure, that maybe that person's rating is going to go down, but everybody else's is going to come up, and you're going to end up in the end with a much more high performing team overall by addressing that person's behavior. Even if you got rid of them, everyone else's is going to raise up, and you're going to end up having better results if you got rid of that one person. But people love to hold on to that one
yeah,
person because it's guaranteed business for
yeah,
at least the time being.
yeah. You raise a really interesting point. If I can change the subject slightly here, you raise Chat GPT and all the LLMs are really good in many ways of providing solid leadership advice. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why that was, because it makes a lot of mistakes in a lot of other areas. So, for
Yeah.
example, if you ask it current events, and it hallucinates and those kinds of things. And it suddenly dawned on me, it's been something I've been saying for a long, long time, about why these LLMs are so good at doing things like giving leadership advice. And the reason is managing people has not changed in millennia. managing groups of people has always been about the same few central topics of listening to them, showing them some respect, making them feel rewarded, help making sure that there's safety and failure. And all of these things are things that have been exactly the same for generations. And it isn't, and those are the kinds of things that things like ChatGPT and other large language models are incredibly good at, is things that have not that are well baked into our society and in our culture. And so it really
Interesting.
does. I mean, I've looked at it and it really does give really pretty solid advice on many of these kinds of topics. And it's because the advice is evergreen. It's
And
also
it's calm and logical,
Yes.
right?
yeah, and right. It is not going to recommend that, holy God, you got to go fire that guy right now, right? That's not
Yeah.
going to come out of ChatGPT,
It
right?
doesn't act like an erratic, egotistical frat boy. So
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think there was something I read the other day that it was talking about our brain structure and what motivates us hasn't changed for like 4,000 years. We basically have the same motivating factors have existed within our brain chemistry and our like the
and we
neural
still can't
pathways.
get it right.
Yeah, right, exactly. And still people still try to challenge it, even though it's so deeply ingrained within us.
I
Okay,
was talking,
Chris. Oh,
I want
sorry.
one quick thing. I was talking with a client on this very topic. I was talking with a client last night or yesterday. I was exchanging emails, and he's got an employee who's causing him a particular set of troubles. And there happened to be an company party, and I was at it. And this employee that he'd been having trouble with had come over to talk to me and a couple of people, just sort of in a chatty conversational mood. And we had, I don't know, we talked for 3 or 5 minutes, and not me, but I mean, he and this group, and I was there, talked for a couple of minutes. And I went over to him and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, the owner of the company, I said, I think I see, your issue with this guy, and if you want to talk about it, let me. So he sends me a text last night that says, so tell me, what did you see? And I said, well, here's what I think. I think, he's particularly smart, and this is why you're having trouble doing that. And he said, that's incredibly insightful. How did you figure that out in just a conversation at the Christmas or at the anniversary party? And I said, and this is exactly the same subject as LLMs. I said, like, I've seen this before. So many, one of the reasons why people like me with 50 years of experience, or ChatGPT with all this knowledge to base itself on, or many of us who are in the consulting, the reason why we can do well at what we do is simple pattern recognition. I have seen this before, right? And the example that he was having with this employee was that this person was really, really smart and didn't think like he needed to do some of the grunt work in the organization. Well, look, I spent the budding portions of my career surrounded by some of the smartest people on the planet, and not one of them would have cleaned a latrine if you had asked them to do that, right? So I've seen it. It's just pattern recognition writ large.
And people do not like to hear that because they all want to feel so special.
Exactly.
Okay, Chris. I don't know if you have a hard stop, but I
Nope.
wanted to pick your brain about this topic that you're really focused in on right now, because it's actually a topic I'm pretty obsessed with as well. Is this middle management section inside of corporate America, the VP director level? Will you just give us all your thoughts on it, why you think it's a problem right now, and some of your ideas of what organizations could do to support them and possibly fix it?
Well, I have noticed that this has been a problem since forever, since having lived through some of that experience myself. But it's been particularly problematic, particularly just in the last few months, with people like Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of Amazon, saying things like they've got, way too much fat in the middle and they've got to cut middle management. And I don't know if you know this, but they did a huge return to office move at Amazon recently, and forcing people to return to the office. And it was in fact a coded way to get rid of middle managers. And nobody really realized this until they thought it through all the way. But what was happening was the middle managers were the ones who had the financial wherewithal and whatnot to move to other places or to work remotely or those kinds of things. And they were also the ones who were inclined to, if told they had to go back to working in downtown Seattle, would likely say, yeah, no, think I'm going to pass, right? And so by forcing everybody, the younger people who were hungry and starving and not are going to, sure, yeah, where do you want me to work? I'll be right there, you know? And the top level people, they had great jobs and they were likely to continue to work from their boat in the harbor anyway. But the middle layer are the people who had the financial wherewithal to say, yeah, no, think I'm going to pass. So that return to office mandate was, in fact, a way to trim the middle management layer. And it didn't work well enough. So now he's busy demonizing these middle managers. And he's doing things like saying, if you don't have at least 10 direct reports, you're not cutting it as a middle manager. Well, think about that. You now have middle managers who have 6 direct reports, and what are they going to do? They're going to get all, MMA on their colleagues to get their groups over so that they have 10 direct reports. So he's created this incredible warfare battle in the middle that is, anyway, that is what has caused me to think more and more.
And they're not the only ones either,
oh, no,
right?
no, no, no.
There's
yeah. And Microsoft
I think it's happening in so many places.
So here's the problem with middle managers, and this is the thing that I don't think people think about enough. When you're an individual contributor, you are really good at what you do. You are a great programmer or a lawyer or an architect or, well, I don't, whatever it is, a designer. You're really good at the job you're doing. And if you get promoted to be the manager of that organization, those technical skills are still incredibly valuable because you can guide people and teach people and tell them how to do it, and you can tell whether their work is any good or not. And so the technical skills that you've grown up with and are proud of and are really good at are still valuable if you're a frontline manager. You still have to learn things about how to motivate people and but there's lots of manager 101 courses that can teach you how to do that. The problem is when you move that next promotion is the most painful promotion in all of the corporate world. When you move from being a frontline manager to being a manager of managers, everything changes. Your job suddenly is no longer about the specific details of how the stuff gets done, but it's about how to manage people whose job it is to get the specific details of how that stuff is done. You can almost never dive through your frontline manager down to the front line and say, hey, you're doing it wrong, you should do it like this. So your technical skills are almost never there. Most of your day is not spent dealing with technical issues on a daily basis. Most of your day-to-day work is around how to motivate people, how to get people to work on complex projects between each other. So every bit of skill that you have that got you where you are is no longer the skills that get you to be successful as a middle manager. Your entire job has changed, and nobody's taught you how to do it. Nobody has shown you how to be a great middle manager. There are very few courses. Most companies don't have classes on how to do this. There are very few books written about how to be a middle manager. There are books written how to be a great CEO, and there are books written but there's nobody teaching in the middle here. In addition, you're sandwiched between the needs of your organization and the random stuff that comes clumping down to you from above, these corporate mandates, you're held to performance expectations that are vague and incomplete and hard to manage, and you've got a bunch of peers who are also struggling as well. So these middle management jobs are incredibly tough. No one teaches people how to do them. I don't know a single human being who woke up as a 9-year-old and said, oh man, I want to be a middle manager at corporate America, right?
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard. And what these people need more than anything else is somebody to talk to. They
Hmm.
cannot talk to somebody else. They can't
Yes.
talk to their peers because their peers likely wants to absorb their group, or their peer is in the same boat as they are. If they go to their manager, who is the CEO or the CTO of the organization, and they say, geez, I'm kind of lost and I'm not sure what to do here. They look like an idiot, and their
Right.
manager doesn't want to work with them. They can't talk to the employees because the employees are the problem. As I said, there's very few books about how to do this. What they really need is a great mentor, but you can't get a mentor inside your organization usually, because the people who rose up in the organization 15 years ago are not the people who understand how the organization is working today. It's it's an incredibly difficult job.
Totally.
I happen to have a very, very close family member who is a middle manager at Amazon currently and is experiencing everything that you're saying. And there's been a lot of very deep conversations about how to handle this stuff. But I love what that you are acknowledging this area of struggle and how difficult it is to be in that position. I mean, you've been brought up, so now, like you said, you're no longer handling the technical aspects. You're helping people, other people help handle the technical aspects. And then you're also from above, you're on the precipice of moving up to a more executive level position. So your career, your future depends on the success of it, but you have to be able to be successful with the people underneath you. There's an incredible amount of pressure, incredible amount of faith and trust that you have to have in the managers now to do a good job, the managers under you to do a good job with their employees. There's so much pressure that's happening in that situation. And I love that you distilled it down to obviously there's so much more complicated than this, but they need somebody to talk to. They need somebody to bounce ideas off of. And
And to
it's
make them feel like they're sane, right?
yeah,
Like,
Yep.
right.
because there's research that shows that there's an incredible amount of burnout that's happening at that level. And I mean, I think people are going to be leaving the positions left and right. And if you don't have anyone in your organization that knows how to develop leaders, and your organization's only going to be able to go so far. Like it is such a problem that
Mhm.
I don't think people, I mean, I'm with you. People just are not paying enough attention to it.
It's one of the things, for example, I look at people like Andy Jassy, who is, saying, well, we need to get rid of these middle management, these positions that are just bloat and they're causing it. But the question I want to ask them, straight to his face is, so where does the next level of leaders come from in your organization? If
Right.
you're getting rid of all the middle management talent in your organization, who is going to be your next CTO? Who's going to be the ones who are leading the next big projects that you have? If what you're doing is actively getting rid of the people in the organization who are learning how to do that, who are having the experiences necessary to know how to build an organization like that. And
Mm.
the short answer is there are none of them, right?
Right.
You're basically, cutting off the growth path in the organization. Imagine, for example, that you're a middle manager at Amazon. And by the way, I have clients who are in that boat right now. And you're a middle manager at Amazon and you're looking up above you to what the future for you might hold. And you realize that you're one of 10 people vying for your boss's job. That is an incredibly difficult, and your boss, may or may not highlight you as the person who is the most likely candidate to be. So what does that mean for you if you have a 90% chance of not being promoted?
Yeah.
That's just a really depressing life to go through.
Well, and also I will say, and I maybe it's what you're saying it is in general, but also at Amazon and specifically, they have impossibly high standards and benchmarks that they expect you to meet if you ever want to receive a promotion. And it's all data driven. So they're not looking at any impact that you've had, how well you've managed necessarily. It's all data driven numbers, KPIs that you have to meet month, a quarter over quarter over quarter over quarter for 2 years to even be considered for a promotion. I always say that Amazon is one of those too big to fail. And I love talking to my family member about it because they go against all of the research. They go against every practice they have. Doesn't make sense to me. Everything I've ever read about humans and organizational psychology and leadership, it kind of goes against it all. But their name is so powerful that people want to work there so badly that they're not willing to leave or do anything about it.
It's what happens if data runs the universe, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
It's not there are not it's not all about the people involved. It's about the numbers. I have a
Mm.
client who came to me last fall and said, "I my third time up for a promotion. I need your help." And as it so happens, we just managed to get them a promotion. I mean, they just got the promotion just weeks ago. After working with them at length on their promotion document and all the
Yeah.
various components of it. The interesting part about their promotion document, even though they're a manager of managers, is that virtually none of it had to do with how they've mentored people, how they've grown
Hmm.
how they've managed to. There was almost no consideration around it was all around success of the products they've been involved in, the success of the numbers that they've had. It's a data-driven culture, which, again, the world needs all kinds of organizations, and not every one of them can be, all touchy-feely, and perhaps the data-driven culture has a reason to shine. I don't know.
We'll see. I mean, or we can go back to what we discussed with Microsoft, where eventually that model that they had for so long worked only to a point, and it's a bell curve,
Hmm.
and then it started to not work anymore. So I'm wondering if maybe eventually Amazon is going to reach that point. I mean, I'll be
Well,
honest, I'm not going to stop
there's
ordering from Prime anytime soon.
Yeah,
So
and nor are we. I mean, it is a
yeah,
rare day in this household when an Amazon box doesn't show up on the porch. So
yeah.
I can't profess to be anything like that. But one of the things I wonder is that in every single one of the organizations that has had this sort of wild and crazy success, there's something structural that happens in the environment that changes the world that they're in. And that has happened to Microsoft, that has happened to 3M, it happened to GE, it happened to, I mean, all these companies over years who grew up and were incredibly high flying at one point or another. There were structural things that happened. Yes, there have been books written about how the innovator's dilemma and a number of other things about how what happens is they get stifled at one point, but very frequently what happens is that the world changes out from underneath them and around them and makes it so they can't succeed the way they've always succeeded. I think Facebook and Meta is an example of that. I think
Hmm.
they're desperately, they spent the last 2 years trying to tell us we were all going to be living in the metaverse. And, I haven't seen a person with a set of AR glasses on in years, and I'm not living in the metaverse now. And I think maybe they misfired on that. And so I don't know.
I tried to start a business in the metaverse. So I came from the mental health field. So I was trying to start a place where people can meet with clinicians virtually with avatar to avatar to remove some of like to really create anonymity in the process. And so I worked for 8 months. I raised a bunch of money, all of these things. And as I'm working in the metaverse, trying to figure out how to make this work, I started just getting the worst vertigo, sweats, just making me dizzy every time I put this thing on. I said, screw this. This will never last. At the where it's
Yeah.
at now, this is never going to work
Well, and I think they will. I think a bunch of that will get solved eventually. I
eventually.
believe. I mean, there were two things that were amazing about that. I spent a bunch of time in Meta's, what do they call it, workspace or whatever,
Yeah.
where
Quest.
some of it was absolutely amazing. So, for example, the audio part was stunning. You could hear people from over here or from over there, and it was very realistic. But I'm sorry, a disembodied avatar is not somebody I'm going to have a meeting with, right?
Yeah.
I think the place where I still think that will have incredible impact in augmented reality. I think there will be, I think you're going to find that your surgeon is going to wear them because there will be things that point out that the blood vessel over here is leaking and that you can close. And so they will be working in the real world, but there will have a heads up display that will give them all kinds of information about it. Car mechanics, where they walk up to it and it says, oh, look, the brake is hot. And, you know, this is the procedure for rebleeding the brakes, and all of that stuff will come up. And so I think there's a bunch of that world, but, you know, we will not be having this very conversation in the metaverse in the next 10 years.
No.
Well, Chris, this has been a very enlightening conversation, and thank you. I'm taking notes over here of all the different little mini leadership lessons I've learned throughout this conversation.
The dark adolescence is my favorite. I'm going to start slipping that into conversations.
How many? It's actually, and as a parent, you would see that I have found myself looking at various organizations and trying to figure out, like, sort of what life stage they're in. I'm on the board of a couple of different startups, and it's very interesting because one of them is about 3 or 4, you know, a toddler, right? And then another one is a tween, right? You know, and you can just see the kinds of, they're starting to recognize reality around them, but they still don't have enough maturity to understand some of the situations they find themselves in, right? And you can do the same thing with organizations. You can watch organizations mature much as you would humans.
True. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode. This has been awesome. Where can people find you?
I am, because of the problem of being one of a million Chris Williamses in the world, I'm at clwill.com. My middle initial is L, so it's clwill, WILL.com, clwill.com. And if you look for CLWill almost anywhere, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I have a bunch of good long videos on YouTube. You don't have to go to the TikTok place. You don't have to go to the other places. If you search for CLWill on social media, you'll find me.
Awesome. And he's got a blue check mark. We did clarify that before we started. So
and Chris,
if you're looking at a Chris Williams that doesn't have a blue check mark,
And Chris, before we go, I just want to say a special thank you for being such an advocate for people who don't have a lot of power in the organization. So, and you've been doing it for a very long time before it was even in vogue, and that really, really matters. So I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done.
Well, thank you very much. It's fun to do.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like working with somebody and watching them realize the control and power they have in themselves.
I think we all appreciate that on this call. That's for sure. That's the best part of it. Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, all that other good influencer stuff. Comment in the comment section one leadership lesson or one workplace lesson that you've learned today, and we will see you next time.